Little red light. Fantastic. Okay.
All right, we're going to start.
I'll keep an eye on the uh, waiting room, but if you want to get started, go ahead.
Alors, bonjour et bienvenue à notre club de lecture avec le livre No Better, Do Better. I'm with Kim Lockhart. It's so nice to see you guys. Um, I got the chance to see Kim. Oops, this is the wrong way. To see Kim in person in Moncton in August after our first book study. It was so much fun. Elle est venue donner une présentation à nos, je pense qu'il y avait comme 450 enseignantes. Et puis, les enseignantes ont adoré sa présentation parce qu'elle est vraiment animée, mais elle apporte des exemples concrets de la pratique. C'était toujours euh, quelque chose de la recherche avec comment l'appliquer dans la salle de classe. Donc, c'était vraiment une belle présentation. Si jamais vous avez la chance de l'inviter à votre école, je vous encourage de le faire. Et puis, avant de commencer, je vais juste vous montrer, je porte un t-shirt violette. C'est Michel Minard-Corriveau qui me l'a donné parce que demain, le 18 octobre, c'est la journée euh, d'éveil du trouble de développement de langage qui a pour but de sensibiliser les gens au fait qu'il y a plusieurs enfants qui ne sont pas diagnostiqués. C'est quand même un trouble qui est assez peu connu, mais qui touche quand même 7% de la population. Donc, demain, le 18, on invite tout le monde à porter du violet et du jaune. So, tomorrow it's a purple and yellow day for, how would you translate the trouble?
Developmental language disabilities or
Thank you.
disorder.
All right. So, fait que les auteurs du livre No Better, Do Better, c'est Meredith et David Libin qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. On est vraiment chanceux de les avoir. C'est un couple dans la vraie vie, mais c'est des grands éducateurs qui ont dédié leur carrière à l'enseignement. Et puis, en 94, ils ont ouvert leur propre école à Harlem qui s'appelait The Family Academy. Et puis, lorsque l'examen de lecture, ils se sont rendus compte que la plupart de leurs élèves ont échoué. Ils se sont posé des questions à savoir, mais comment ça se fait qu'une école avec autre ressources que la note ont eu des faibles résultats comme ça. Et c'est là qu'ils se sont vraiment lancés dans la recherche, d'essayer de trouver les meilleures pratiques de démystifier les mythes pédagogiques. Et puis, en 2019, ils ont sorti le livre No Better, Do Better, Teaching the Foundation so every child can read. And it's now available on Amazon if you want to get it. And more recently, they released a No Better, Do Better comprehension in the Science of Reading Practice from Scholastic. And I just want to say that I love the title because I feel it kind of takes a bit of guilt away because I know for myself being a teacher from the classroom and a lot of teachers sometimes they kind of feel guilty of like, oh, I should have done this or I should have done this like that. And you're kind of like afraid that you've been doing some harms to kid. But the title kind of makes you feel like you didn't know any better. So it's not your fault, but now you know better. So you're going to do better. And we kind of have a question for you guys about the cover of the book. So I was listening to the podcast because I'm just going to let our participant know that if they didn't get a chance to read the book, they can listen to the podcast No Better, Do Better with Millicent Laurie, episode 200. There's also an episode on reading Road Trip. And just yesterday, I think or the day before, they released two new episodes of the season two of the Knowledge Matter podcast. I love season one, and season two is going to be as good, I'm sure. So I was walking last night listening to the podcast, and then in it you explained the cover, why you chose on the cover Kaleidoscope. So I don't know if you can just explain to us why you chose that.
Sure. If you take a look at a text carefully, it has what we call features. One feature is the vocabulary, how simple or difficult it is. Another feature is the syntax, or feature is the theme or purpose of the text very clear? And is there one theme Or are there two themes? Or are there multiple themes? Or are there multiple purposes? And how well does the author connect all these different parts of the text or any of the ideas of the text? How long are the paragraphs? There's research showing children have trouble with longer paragraphs. They don't do well with very short paragraphs either. They like Goldilocks. They're just the right size. So all of these things are features of a text: theme, purposes, vocabulary, syntax, or sentence length. But they all interact with each other. So the vocabulary may be somewhat difficult, but if the purpose of the text is very clear and there's only one purpose, then the vocabulary doesn't present as many obstacles. Or if the syntax is difficult, but the knowledge demands that you need to understand the text are simple, then the syntax doesn't present as many problems. So they all interact with each other. And it's that interaction of all these different features of the text that tell you how complex or difficult the text is or how simple it is. And that changes from text to text. So it's just like with a kaleidoscope. A kaleidoscope is made up of pieces of plastic with different colors and mirrors that take the light and bounce it off those different pieces of plastic. But when you turn the little thing at the end of the kaleidoscope, then everything changes. It's the same, the features are still there. It's the same pieces of plastic and it's the same light coming in, but they bounce off of each other in different ways to give you a different image. So it's the same with a text. Simple vocabulary means something is not that difficult, but if the sentences are very difficult and the theme is very confusing, then then the text becomes more difficult. Each of the different features interact with each other to determine the difficulty. And no text is going to be exactly the same.
I love that explanation. So clear. And I love the image too. Very powerful.
I never liked kaleidoscopes. I thought when I was a kid, I thought kaleidoscopes were kind of dumb. You looked through them once and that was it.
Well, that's because you had ones that were plastic. If you have ones with leaves in them. And the other thing is those they're all loose, right? They shift around in different ways. And so can in a text, the features can shift like that too, in almost infinite variety. So it's what we all love about books. And so we just want to remind everybody that you got to stay in the book for your kids. I mean, just as we do for readers, we have to figure that out. Yes.
Okay, well, I didn't explain this, but I'm going to ask my next question. The last book club that we had, we actually talked about in the text, not out of the text, in the text, not out of and we did that with Anita Archer when we were in Toronto. And then Annie, I think, asked, like, what does it mean? So can you explain what you mean when you say, like, stay in the text?
So,
where did it come from?
Anita Archer, because they met with her in Toronto. It's great. Well, when we both for instructional purposes and then when kids are reading and making meaning, it's there in the text. They have to stay to learn to read better, to learn to stay when it's challenging, and we have to coach them to stay in the text. And obviously they bring their own selves and their own knowledge. We all do into that experience, but you don't want to make up things that aren't true in the text. We do that too much this side of the border, and make things up. So the text is the currency between, for the children and the classroom exchange. And the other reason it's really important, I think, for both of us is there's real equity considerations when you're dealing, if you're dealing with teaching literacy in two languages. or kids that don't come from as language or book rich family, the book levels the playing field if that is what the teacher is working with. All the kids have access to that book. They're all in the class together. And so the work of understanding it belongs to everybody. So it doesn't privilege the kids that are allowed to talk about their weekends or went to a museum and want to talk all about the mummies they saw, if the book's about mummies, because that privileges those children that were lucky, but not the chance to learn from the text for everybody. So it's also, it feels really important to us in terms of making school center every child's experience and valuing every child's input and brain development. So
the other way to look at it is with the kaleidoscope. You can't really appreciate the kaleidoscope unless you look into it.
You have to look
that's number one. And number two, if you want, you're teaching a text and you want your kids to understand it. So you're going to look at, you can only get that by looking at the text and seeing what are the features and the combination of features that might make it difficult or not difficult. And that's only by looking at the text. If instead you say, well, this week we're working on the structure standard, and then we're going to ask questions about the structure standard. In the United States, that's usually standard 6. So we're going to go 5. So we're going to look at the structure standard. Well, the structure of that text may be very simple. Jose and his girlfriend, Gabriela, had a big fight. And the text is completely about a description of that fight, what caused it, and what happened after it. Or it's a text about how dogs have such great sense of smell. And it introduces that, and it tells all about how a dog's sense of smell works and how it's much more powerful than humans and all the reasons that they use it. Well, the structure of that text is pretty clear. So the structure standard doesn't help you at all, or very little with that text. So you want to teach that text? What you have to do is look at that text and say, well, where is it going to throw my kids? Is it vocabulary? Is it syntax? Is it the author is not connecting the ideas to each other? Is that they're very long paragraphs? That's the only way you can do it. And that's the real basis of text at the center.
Would it also be related to not teaching reading strategy or reading comprehension strategy isolated and kind of focus on the text and see what we need to comprehend that text instead of focusing on, okay, we're going to learn today this reading strategy?
Right. Annie wants to say, Annie.
Yes, hi. Because after I asked this question, I pursued the topic, and I found something from a presentation from Anita Archer, and she talks about asking text-dependent questions, because if we don't, the students will the concentration and the comprehension will be reduced. I'm just trying to find examples of a question that would be not from the text. Would it be do you think giraffes should be allowed in a school? Whatever. Let's say the book talked about giraffes in schools. Do you think giraffes should be allowed in the school? Well, that's out of the text, right? Because the question should be, do you think that giraffe do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
I'm trying to, okay.
So that's, and she's out, we believe that too. And the next, not to talk about the podcast, but in episode 3, Margaret McCowan, who, if you know about Tiers of Vocabulary, she and Isabel Beck created that way of organizing language instruction and vocabulary acquisition. But she has done amazing comprehension research, and she is almost belligerent about it. It's a very provocative episode and we think we need to be provocative in the field, because even the publishers are under tremendous pressure to do that, to teach kids about main idea as if it exists away from a book or a movie or an argument. It doesn't. It is there in that book. Let's just stay with books. It doesn't matter. Kids can get what a main idea is. They understand that idea, but that doesn't mean they can find it in a challenging book. And if they miss it, it isn't because they're dumb and don't know main idea. It's because this book presented challenges or it was subtle, you know, what David was saying. So strategies, what McCowan says is strategies actually distract. I think this is what you were saying. They actually distract the kid because they start to think about, okay, characters development. Let me think about character development. And you're not thinking about the characters in the real book that you're reading. All of a sudden you're thinking about what this idea is and what does the teacher want you to say, as opposed to that. So that's a problem with strategies. They also, David was kind of saying this, if it's the time in the week or the materials ask about them, but they don't suit the reading, it is really, it creates the teacher is all of a sudden trying to do this thing that doesn't fit the book. And so it becomes really artificial and inorganic. And you should use strategies, the ones that have a research base when you're stuck. That's when you do something strategic to unstick yourself. So we want kids to get stuck and then help them understand what to do to get meaning.
Well, you could use a strategy when you get stuck, but Isabel Beck also talks about going back into the text.
Yeah.
Can you see, was there something that happened earlier in the text that will help you understand that? The problem with, you got to be careful about using a strategy, because then it kind of moves the kid away from the text. We'll say, well, let's say summarizing is a good strategy, so I'm going to try to summarize here, and it might not work. Right. Or ask a question is a good thing. You're better off looking at the text and saying, all right, that's what the text says here. Maybe I should read this sentence again. Maybe I don't really understand this sentence, or maybe there's a word here.
In episode 1 of season 2, when kids go home after a day of school and their parents say to them, "What did you learn at school today?" Very few children say, "Oh, I learned the monitoring my comprehension strategy." No, they will talk about the content because they're in the text. So like my own 2 children, they are now 12 and 14. They've never come home and said, "Oh, Mom, today we practice summarizing." No, what they'll say is, "Mom, we were learning about," what is she learning about right now in science? Forces. And she'll talk about, forces and pulleys and gears. But to learn about that, she used the summarizing strategy, but keeping the text at the center of her learning and not the summarizing and strategies to understand forces and forces of things.
Yeah. Okay, but and then I can stop asking questions, but I need, because I'm in grade 1, right? So I need examples of a question that should not be asked, that is not text dependent. That's why I was going with my giraffe, but
got it. David's good at this.
Let's go back to the giraffe. So the kid's reading a story about giraffes, or an informational text.
Why they have long necks.
Okay, why they have long necks. Now, a text-dependent question would be, why would a giraffe who didn't have, if a giraffe was born with a short neck, what problems would he have compared to the giraffes with a long neck? That would be a text-dependent question. An example of a question that is not text-dependent would be, have you ever gone to a zoo and seen a giraffe?
Yeah.
That's not text dependent.
And then, like I said, the lucky kids who have gone to a zoo and seen a giraffe get to talk and share about something that has nothing to do with learning to read. And the kid who never got to go to a zoo, never saw a live giraffe, is just stuck there waiting. Yeah.
Fantastic question, Annie. I think that we all had that question, but didn't know how to articulate it. So thank you for asking on our behalf.
I think that's the first question I've ever got that was spoken by someone that it was their second language.
And how come are we not translating anymore? Is it because I know everybody everybody who speaks Quebecois speaks better English.
Oh, but I'm not from Quebec. I'm from New Brunswick.
Okay.
No, there's a French-speaking population outside of Quebec.
We're in Vermont. No, I'm one of the few Americans who know my provinces because my brother's Canadian. So,
but yeah, no, I have a thick accent, but I'm perfectly good with understanding English.
That's really funny on us. Yep, New Brunswick's north of Maine. We live in Vermont, so
Okay.
Vermont.
Okay, should we go back to the slides? And I think we might have one or two more questions if we have time, but we might move on as well. Okay.
This was just a quote at the beginning, and we kind of talked about it, that reading comprehension is not an observable skill. It's not even a cluster of observable skills. Donc, c'est pas une compétence, ni même un ensemble de compétences qu'on peut observer. Les scientifiques cognitifs désignent la compréhension comme une représentation. Ça veut dire qu'elle est représentée dans nos esprits. C'est quelque chose qui se passe dans notre tête qu'on ne peut pas observer. Donc, ça démontre comment la compréhension en lecture, c'est complexe. Hein? C'est pas juste lire un texte et répondre à des questions. Dans la préface du livre, Meredith et David font une genre de petite mise en garde où ils expliquent qu'une des grandes motivations pour écrire ce livre, c'est venu de leur inquiétude que beaucoup des discussions autour de la science de la lecture sont dominées par les compétences de base, comme la conscience phonologique, les correspondances graphème-phonème, le décodage, tout ça, la courbe du bas, le Scarsborough, mais que les processus plus larges sont négligés. Puis je trouvais que c'était comme premièrement, c'est une super belle motivation, mais c'est aussi une belle mise en garde pour nous, comme enseignants, de s'assurer que lorsqu'on fait notre enseignement, qu'on touche pas juste les compétences de base comme le décodage, mais qu'on va vraiment toucher toutes les compétences parce que, comme on en a parlé, c'est complexe. Puis, je fais un petit lien ici avec The Active View of Reading, où est-ce que on peut voir que c'est un processus qui est complexe, hein? C'est pas juste la bulle bleue, mais on a aussi la bulle rose qui, lorsqu'on mélange le birding process, est violette. Donc, je passe un peu rapidement là, parce qu'on a parlé beaucoup. Alors, Kim?
Okay. So before I jump into this, I don't want to ask too many more questions, but I do have one more question I thought I would ask Meredith and David before we go. But I wanted to ask you very quickly if you could explain your reference to mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. We're going to touch on that in a little bit, but I just wondered if you could share with us why that's important for us to consider when it comes to comprehension, and how mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors is important when we are selecting text. Sorry, you're muted again.
Is everybody familiar with analogy, do you think?
I am, but I'm not really familiar with the sliding door.
Yeah, that's less used. So Sims Bishop had all three at the beginning. So the idea is that every child, every person deserves to read books that mirror their own lived experience. So there are touchstones of familiarity that create comfort and confidence that I know this world. I know how I get this. So there's lots of touch points, but that equally children deserve to look through the window at the wider world. That reading is really the most amazing invention that humankind has ever made. It lets us transcend. We can cross space and time through a book, and it's efficient, and we can go anywhere. So the idea of windows is that you can. David is checking his baseball scores because he's heard it before. So windows, like we can't go to Mars, but we could read about Mars. So we can't easily get up and take our kids to the Amazon, but we can look at the animals and the ecosystem of the Amazon.
Maybe not even to Montreal.
Yeah, exactly. So that's windows. Books can take us to the wider world, and everybody deserves that. Sliding glass doors is really lovely because it's this idea that you can envision yourself in the world of the book. So I love this for like in the US with all, with just the history of enslaved people and inequities. There was this book and movie called Hidden Figures, and it was about the women, the mathematicians, who were all Black, who were master calculators. Literally, they were called the calculators, and they did the calculations for the first moon the first moon journeys with live astronauts. So their calculations about liftoff and velocity and where they would land on the moon and getting back safely were critical. So a Black girl who's good at math did not know that world existed, did not know I can take my math skills and I can go work at NASA or be an astronaut. This is what good people who are good at math can do. That's the sliding glass door. Or, I always think I loved C.S. Lewis books, still do. But, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe were literally, for years, I went into closets or wardrobe furniture and tried to see if the back would open up for me. So that's that's the sliding glass door that, you get to walk through to another world. But
Good thing you never went in.
But our realization writing the book is that if kids only get a diet of one of these things, if there's too many mirrors, they actually don't learn how to read when lots of cultural references or it's an unfamiliar world and there aren't touchstones. You have to work harder. And working harder is important to become a good reader, because we all get stuck, and you have to know what to do when it's unfamiliar or sort of alien to you. What do you draw on? How do you build meaning there? So if we are too comfortable and let our kids read about comfortable things that are worlds like theirs, they will not be as their reading muscles won't be as strong. So the varied diet, I think, is crucial. And again, it's a justice issue. It's about equalizing or creating equitable places and letting kids know how other people in other places live. So it feels important for reading comprehension itself, for both times of comfort and times where it's not, you're less comfortable and you have to work harder. And that's important that we let our kids do that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I know that's definitely something that I focused on this past summer in my course at Vancouver Island University. We were looking at your book was one of the course readings, mandatory readings for the course, but also Molly Ness's Read Alouds for All Learners. Mm-hmm. And that was another book that we focused on, and how mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors is meant to represent the diverse identities in our classrooms, but also to learn about other people's cultures, but also to further our knowledge about our own as well. So thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, because I know that is definitely something that a lot of people have been asking about. Okay, I will jump in now to the first highlight. One of the first questions that arose when I was reading the book Know Better, Do Better, and I read it this past summer, and as I said, I loved it so much, I incorporated it into my course at Vancouver Island University's Faculty of Ed. Can we teach reading comprehension in isolation, like phonemic awareness and phonics? And the simple answer to that is no. And sometimes we have some misunderstandings. And some of those misunderstandings stem from the National Reading Panel report, which was released in the year 2000. And the NRP report makes it look like those 5 pillars of reading can be taught in isolation. It almost has this effect of siloing each one of those components or elements of the reading process. And as we know, we can teach phonemic awareness, but we also know that phonemic awareness is more effective when we teach it with phonics, with letter sound correspondences, and not just in isolation. But we also know that we can't just teach those word reading strategies. Otherwise, we're just going to have great decoders, and we're not going to have students who understand what they read. That's where that vocabulary piece comes in. But the National Reading Panel almost made it look like reading comprehension is to be taught in isolation of the other four pillars, and that is absolutely not true. In fact, the NRP identified 8 instructional strategies that help promote reading comprehension, and these have to be intertwined with all of the other elements and not just taught, because I think what happened is when people look at those 5 pillars, they think, oh, comprehension are those strategies in isolation without weaving in all of the other elements of the reading process. Now, the 8 instructional strategies that they mentioned are monitoring for comprehension, answering questions from the teacher, using graphic organizers, asking questions while reading to clarify understanding, cooperative learning, so kids working together, story structure, so that's like, who is the main character? When does it take place? Where does it take place? Those W questions, why, what, when, where, who, and also summarizing. But as David said earlier, we don't want to just pick texts that lend themselves to summarizing, because when you go to a bookstore or you go to the library, not all texts will necessarily lend themselves. So the NRP does say that it's important for students to know these strategies and be able to use these strategies flexibly. And I think that is such a key part of this. And so the infographic that I have on the left are those 5 pillars of reading that the NRP, the National Reading Panel, discussed. And then I have those old-fashioned, what I used to use, teaching those neat and tidy strategies of the week. And I'll be honest, it made teaching easier, because it really helped me to teach reading almost in neat and tidy units. So when I was speaking with parents, I'd say, your son is very good at making predictions. Well, that's because I chose texts that lend themselves to be able to make predictions, like, oh, Goldilocks and the 3 bears, what do you think is going to happen when she gets in Baby Bear's bed? But not all books will lend themselves to making predictions, especially if it's an informational text. So we have to make sure that we are teaching students the strategies and keeping them in the text and showing them how to use those strategies flexibly.
Alors, la lecture, l'écriture et l'expression orale, communication orale, forcément doit faire partie de la vie scolaire de l'élève à tous les jours. Il y avait une citation que j'ai beaucoup aimée qui expliquait, on dit toujours, on entend souvent, il faut aller from speech to print, donc de l'oral vers l'écrit. Et puis, la lecture dépend du langage oral. Donc, l'enfant, il apprend pas une nouvelle langue quand il apprend à lire. Il fait des liens avec ce qu'il sait déjà dire, ce qu'il comprend déjà dans son langage. Donc, c'est vraiment interrelié, la communication orale, la lecture et l'écriture. Donc, j'ai vraiment aimé cette partie où est-ce qu'on dit que l'enfant ne réapprend pas une nouvelle langue lorsqu'il apprend à lire. Hein, ça fait juste un bénéficie l'autre. Donc, quand j'améliore ma lecture, j'améliore aussi ma communication orale, mon écriture. Donc, c'est tout interrelié.
Sorry, I'm just in the chat box with David and Meredith. So sorry about that. I was very focused. On behalf of everyone, David and Meredith, I just want to say thank you for being here. Okay, so sorry, did you want to say something?
No, just we really appreciate, when you write a book, it's the opposite of teaching. So it's very weird to do this work getting feedback. And so it feels very loving to have you all read the book and think about it. So thank you.
And it's really special and fun when it's in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, we love.
I mean, the book has, there were people bought it in Australia and here and there.
But to get to talk to people who read again, and friends with a bilingual perspective too is very cool.
It's really special.
So remind us next month, and maybe we can come back for the end of the discussion too.
Well, that would be lovely. Our teachers here appreciate it, and more importantly, our students are benefiting from your book. So thank you.
All right, well, we're going to leave so you can keep working on it. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
So our second takeaway, or my second takeaway, our second takeaway was students must see themselves and others in the literature they read. And Meredith did just touch on this. So I'm just going to go very, very quickly through this. Often the books that we choose to read in our classrooms, not consciously, but often they reflect a Eurocentric, are seen through a Eurocentric lens, and they don't always do justice to the rich stories and histories and the literary traditions. And often it's because we are limited to what we can find in our schools. And often what we have in our schools are very outdated. And so we want to make sure that our students know about their own histories, that they take pride in their own histories and traditions and feel safe to share their own stories. But we also want to make sure that we are learning from each other's experiences. And so Meredith has already explained the windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, but I found this quote really resonated with me. It says, when children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the images they see are distorted, negative, or laughable, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society of which they are a part. And so I think that is really quite powerful, because I just know from my own experience, I typically gravitate towards books that I enjoyed as a child. But of course, the books I enjoyed as a child are now outdated by 40 years. And so I want to make sure that I am bringing in diverse literature, with new vocabulary too. We're not just talking about picture books, though picture books are extremely important because we want to have those visual representations and diverse illustrations, but we also want to make sure that the vocabulary is representing diverse cultures and experiences. And in fact, in my course this summer, I deliberately chose different books, some from Indigenous authors. Another one was written by a Jewish author. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge the diversity in our classrooms, but try to learn from those different experiences as well. And I just wanted to share this one quote from the book. It says, when readers are familiar with a book's topic or setting, it's easier for rhythm to make the crucial connections that lead to comprehension. And for example, like possible immigrants from South Africa who have never experienced a Canadian winter may not be able to make those text to self connections if they read a text that says feeling cold to the bone. So we take some of those things for granted, and we have to make sure that we are really trying to see this through the lens of someone else, and that is not always easy to do. And Madame, maybe you can discuss the icons in the bottom.
Je trouve que c'est vraiment super intéressant ce que tu as dit. Je sais que moi, en tant qu'enseignante, je devais vraiment faire un effort de lire plus de livres informatifs, de mettre plus de livres documentaires dans ma salle de classe parce que j'avais tendance à faire juste des livres narratifs. Puis, c'est vrai que faut faire attention à ce qu'on lit. On a tendance à choisir des livres que nous, on aime, mais il faut penser à tous nos élèves, à penser à leurs intérêts. Ça m'a fait penser aussi à quelques années passées, la bibliothécaire de l'école, elle avait élagué des livres de bibliothèque qui contenaient le mot indien. Parce que ici, on dit plus indien, mais autochtone ou Première Nation. Donc, juste pour s'assurer que justement des personnes peut-être autochtones se sentent pas blessées. Comme il y avait un livre où est-ce que bon, c'était très caricaturé, où est-ce que les personnages avaient les plumes puis tout ça, puis tu sais, fait que, je trouve qu'on a en fait un beau travail à ce niveau-là, puis de plus en plus, on a des livres de littérature jeunesse qui démontrent la diversité culturelle, la diversité sexuelle. Donc, je pense qu'on est vraiment dans la bonne direction. Moi, j'avais ajouté sur la diapositive le petit bras parce qu'il y avait dans le livre, ça disait, elle disait comment est-ce que la lecture, c'est difficile, puis on doit we have to provide students with frequent opportunities for productive struggle. Fait qu'il faut donner l'occasion aux enfants d'avoir des des textes qui sont dans leur zone proximale de développement, que oui, c'est normal que apprendre à lire, c'est difficile, puis même moi, comme je suis une bonne lectrice, mais parfois on lit des textes qui sont pas toujours faciles, mais d'être dans cette zone proximale-là de développement, puis avoir un éducateur ou un enseignant qui est là pour appuyer. Puis tout le long du livre aussi, il y avait le petit symbole ici, genre de planète, pour nos élèves nouvelles arrivants ou d'actualisation linguistique qui apprennent une nouvelle langue. Donc ça, j'ai vraiment trouvé ça intéressant que tout le long du livre, il propose des pistes, puis il démontre comment cette approche-là aussi peut s'appliquer vraiment à tous les élèves. Il parle aussi comment la littératie, l'alphabétisation, ben, c'est vraiment une porte qui ouvre toutes les portes possibles. Donc, en travaillant les compétences fondamentales de la lecture et de l'écriture, hein, ça permet aux élèves de choisir la porte qu'ils veulent pour leur projet de vie et carrière, de vraiment leur une porte ouverte sur le monde. Je trouvais que c'était vraiment une belle image. On en a parlé au début des livres miroirs, fenêtres et portes coulissantes. Moi, c'était la première fois que j'entendais Sliding Glass Door. Alors, moi, c'est une mini leçon que je faisais souvent avec mes élèves, puis je trouve que c'est une mini leçon qu'on peut facilement faire de la maternelle à la 12e année. Donc, on peut faire un petit tableau d'ancrage. Enseigner aux élèves, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire un livre miroir? Un livre miroir, c'est un livre dans lequel on se reconnaît dans l'histoire, on peut faire des liens, ça nous permet d'apprendre à mieux se connaître, à mieux se comprendre. Alors qu'un livre fenêtre, c'est qu'on découvre une nouvelle réalité de nous. Ça nous permet de nous ouvrir sur le monde. Puis là, ben, j'ai apporté deux exemples de livres de littérature jeunesse. Alors, il y a celui-ci, Congé pour maman, où est-ce que c'est une petite fille, Sophie, qui elle apporte sa maman à la plage pour une journée de congé, mais elle a des bourrasques. Moi, j'appelle ça des crises de bacon. Puis ces bourrasques, ces sautes d'humeur, ben, ça fait en sorte que c'est pas vraiment une journée de repos pour sa maman. Puis ben, pour moi, c'est un livre miroir parce que j'ai deux jeunes filles, puis ça me fait penser que des fois, on fait des activités, puis ça va pas toujours comme prévu, puis des fois, ouf, ça peut être épuisant. Donc, quand j'ai lu ce livre-là, c'était vraiment un miroir. Je me suis reconnue comme la maman dans ce livre-là qui était comme fatiguée. Puis, un autre livre, Ellie Labaki et les gouttes de pluie. C'est un nouveau livre qui est publié chez les éditions Bouton d'Or Acadie. Ça raconte l'histoire de Ellie, qui est un petit enfant libanais qui émigre au Canada. Donc, pour moi, ça, c'était un livre fenêtre parce que ça ouvre une porte vers la réalité des immigrants. Alors, quand on immigre dans un nouveau pays, c'est pas toujours par choix. Et puis, ça peut être très dépaysant, déstabilisant. Donc, comment on peut se sentir, comment on s'acclimate et tout ça. Donc, pour moi, c'était un livre fenêtre. Alors, comment on peut faire pour créer une culture qui valorise les connaissances? Dans le livre, il y avait plusieurs idées d'activités que j'ai ressorties. Une que je trouve qui est vraiment importante, c'est l'interdisciplinarité. On entend beaucoup les enseignants dire qu'il manque de temps, il manque de temps, il manque de temps. Ben, si on intégrait la lecture, l'écriture dans toutes les matières scolaires, c'est une façon de maximiser son temps. Puis d'aller chercher, par exemple, les mots de vocabulaire qui sont dans notre programme de sciences ou qui sont dans notre programme de maths ou de sciences humaines quand on choisit un thème, ben, de rester sur ce thème-là, sur ce sujet-là pour une longue période de temps pour vraiment aller creuser, inviter des parents, des gens de la communauté, des experts de ce thème-là pour venir parler aux élèves, de créer des petits jeux pour développer leurs connaissances comme Jeopardy, Kahoot. Les autres, ils disaient qu'ils affichaient les choses dans le corridor, entre autres les mots de vocabulaire, puis qu'à leur école, l'école de Meredith et David, de Family Academy, que les murs d'un corridor étaient tapissés de mots de vocabulaire. Fait que je trouvais que c'était comme une bonne idée de mettre les mots de vocabulaire des œuvres, des textes des élèves dans l'école, mais aussi de ne pas avoir peur de sortir des murs de l'école. Il faisait aussi le Hall Pass. Donc, c'est chaque semaine, les enseignants choisissaient 5 mots de vocabulaire niveau 2, qu'on va parler de tantôt, qui évidemment enseignaient explicitement. Et puis, à chaque fois qu'ils sortaient dans le corridor, ils devaient apporter avec eux le petit anneau. Puis, n'importe quel adulte dans l'école pouvait les arrêter puis leur demander, OK, parle-moi du mot furious, purpose, un des mots qu'il y avait sur le Hall Pass. Donc, c'était vraiment eux autres, ils ont créé vraiment cette culture-là de connaissance, de curiosité, de vocabulaire dans l'école. Et puis, ça crée vraiment un effet de chaîne. Moi, j'allais remarquer avec mes élèves que quand moi, je suis motivée puis intéressés, intrigués d'apprendre des nouvelles choses, des nouveaux mots, eux aussi. Puis quand nous, on les voit qui sont intéressés, ben là, on est encore plus intéressés, puis ça augmente. Il parle aussi du Knowledge Journal, alors un genre de journal de connaissances, où est-ce que quand on lit un texte, peu importe le texte, à chaque paragraphe ou section, on s'arrête. Donc, on lit la section, on s'arrête. Ensuite, on réfléchit à, OK, qu'est-ce qui était l'idée principale, la nouvelle information que j'ai appris là-dessus. Donc, il y a comme trois colonnes. Il y a la colonne où est-ce qu'on écrit la section, le titre, ou le titre du chapitre. Ensuite, la deuxième colonne où est-ce qu'on va mettre la nouvelle information qu'on a appris. Puis la dernière colonne où est-ce qu'on va faire des liens entre ce qu'on a appris et puis ce qu'on a déjà lu ou appris sur ce sujet-là. Donc, vraiment faire des liens, des connexions. Et puis, ça peut être à l'écrit, mais aussi sous forme de dessin ou de petites listes. Ça peut être des mots, c'est pas besoin d'être des phrases.
I'm a little slow with the unmuting. My apologies. Okay, so knowledge building through read alouds. The two most effective practices to build knowledge, which is at the heart of comprehension, are read alouds in the early grades, and then later on, when students are decoding, the volume of reading that they do independently. So again, the two most effective practices to build content knowledge and build comprehension are read alouds in the early grades and the volume of independent reading afterwards. It's important to remember that read alouds to students are important before they're able to independently read themselves, because we want to give them access to that richer vocabulary that they cannot yet decode on their own. It also provides them access to information that they cannot yet access themselves. Lieben and Lieben suggests that read aloud should take between 15 to 20 minutes a day, every day of the school week, and 1 to 3 weeks per topic. So rather than what I used to do in my classroom was read a fun little story on Monday, read another fun little story on Tuesday, read another fun little story on Wednesday, rather than skip through all these different stories, do a deeper dive into some of those read alouds, really pick out that rich vocabulary that's going to transpire into other subject areas, get really deep into the understanding and the author's intentions in that book, rather than just reading a book and hoping some of that information sticks. Because really at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to information sticks. Also, it is recommended to choose something called an anchor text, and that anchor text is meant to hook students, to hook their interest, spark that curiosity for them to want to learn more. And this often is important when we are building text sets, which are a number of different texts on the same topic. So we want to pick that anchor text and then have them really think about what more they want to learn. And when we're reading aloud, in Lieben and Leiben's book, they say that we want to pause to explain things that may affect their comprehension. We want to take those pauses, short periods of time, to clarify any misunderstandings, but we want them to enjoy that first text. And then for the second read, we want to maybe ask some questions, share some wonderings, ask them what misunderstandings there might be. And then when we do that second read aloud, we are deliberately and intentionally trying to answer some of those questions. And then we can dig deeper as the week goes on as well. As I said, there's a lot of research out there. Read aloud serve as an equalizer. Meredith highlighted that when she was speaking to us earlier. It's evens the equity playing field. Read aloud support language development, especially for our ELL and second language learners. I know when I do a French read aloud in the classroom, a lot of that language and vocabulary just goes right over their heads because they don't have the oral language foundation yet. So we really want to build that oral language foundation, and one of the best ways to build that oral language foundation is through listening comprehension, having them listen to those rich texts to augment their vocabulary. So when they go to read those texts on their own, they can attach meaning to those words they're decoding. And also read alouds enhance a sense of community for linguistically diverse students. So again, as Meredith said, we really want to be thinking about our read alouds as a means of evening the playing field and creating more equitable outcomes for our students.
Puis, la lecture à voix haute est super importante dans les premières années parce que les élèves ne sont pas encore capables de lire ces livres-là par eux-mêmes, mais ils sont importantes toute la scolarité, même les plus vieux, parce qu'on a toujours dans nos salles de classe, même au secondaire, des élèves qui sont des nouveaux arrivants, n'ont pas la langue ou des élèves qui ont des difficultés en lecture. Donc, encore une fois, ça permet de diminuer les écarts entre les élèves. Dans le balado de l'épisode un ou deux là, de la saison 2 de Knowledge Matter, il disait less is more. On a tendance comme enseignant on court après le temps tout le temps. Puis, des fois, on passe à travers les textes vite, puis on change de sujet rapidement. Donc, encore une fois, de rester dans le même sujet longtemps, puis ben, peut-être si tu n'as pas le temps de tout finir les activités que tu avais prévues ou c'est pas grave, mais de donner la chance aux élèves de vraiment aller dans le texte, creuser, se questionner, répondre à leurs questions, parce qu'on a tendance des fois à les couper vite, les élèves, là, pas leur donner la chance de s'exprimer, de parler, de discuter entre eux, parce qu'on est tellement pressé dans le temps, puis on veut, tu sais, c'est toujours une course contre la montre. Là, j'ai présenté la corde de Scarsborough, mais avec les livres, juste pour montrer que en début d'apprentissage, les élèves vont lire des livres décodables qu'ils ont appris le code à l'intérieur. Et puis, les livres de littérature jeunesse, que ce soit narratif informatif, on peut les faire lors d'un enseignement, lors d'un read aloud ou d'une lecture interactive à voix haute, pour aller travailler toute la corde du haut, donc le vocabulaire, la syntaxe, tout ça. Et puis, éventuellement, quand l'élève sera plus fluide, il pourra lire ces livres-là par lui-même.
Hey, Madame, I think Annie has another question she wants to ask.
Sure.
Je me demandais justement s'il y avait du temps pour des questions. Donc, moi, mes questions sont vraiment pratico-pratiques, là. Je sais qu'un nouveau mot de vocabulaire doit être employé par l'élève comme 200 fois, genre, pour qu'il soit intégré. Sinon, il part c'est peut-être 100 fois, mais je sais que c'est plusieurs fois. Quand je lis un livre à mes élèves, là, ben, ils sont en première année. Beaucoup, ce n'est pas leur langue première, le français. Il y a tellement de mots que je leur explique au début. Puis pendant que je lis, là, je vais dans les synonymes puis tout ça. Mais puis je connais les trois niveaux de mots, là, comme le three tiers, là. Le vocabulaire du niveau un, 2, 3. Je sais qu'on veut développer le vocabulaire du niveau 2, tout ça. Mais il y a tellement de mots. Comment on choisit? Comment ils ont, les auteurs, là, comment ils ont. Ah, je vais allumer ma caméra. Je sais pas pourquoi que j'ai. Comment les auteurs ont fait pour décider avec quoi ils tapissaient? Bon, vous avez compris ma question, je vous écoute.
C'est une bonne question, puis il n'y a pas de
Ok.
bonne ou de mauvaise réponse. C'est sûr qu'il y a des mots, euh, il y a des mots que tu vas expliquer rapidement pendant que tu lis le texte, puis il y a des mots que tu vas choisir puis tu vas vraiment enseigner explicitement. Fait que des mots que tu vas expliquer rapidement dans le texte, c'est un mot qui s'explique facilement, puis que genre, tu peux juste t'arrêter, puis je sais pas moi, si ça te dit une causeuse, ben, tu peux dire, ah ben ça, c'est une chaise berceuse, puis tu continues. Ça permet juste à l'élève de comprendre, puis on continue. Les mots que tu vas choisir, on va parler des mots de vocabulaire 2 et 3 là, tantôt,
Ouais,
ici. Mais ce qui arrive, c'est que les mots du palier 1, c'est des mots qu'on utilise à tous les jours. Puis les mots du palier du niveau 3, c'est des mots qui sont souvent spécifiques à des domaines. Donc, par exemple, si c'est des mots reliés à la mathématique, ben, on va l'enseigner dans le cadre de notre cours de maths. Si c'est des mots reliés à la science, on va. Mais les mots du palier 2, il dit c'est des mots parfois qui tombent, qu'on oublie parce qu'ils appartiennent pas à personne. Tu sais, les niveaux de niveau 1, on l'apprend comme ça, mais c'est surtout les mots de niveau 2. Je sais que dans le livre, à un moment donné, David disait que lui avait pris les textes de troisième année, je pense, puis il avait ressorti tous les mots de niveau 2 de chaque texte pour essayer de faire des comme liens.
Oui, ceux qui revenaient souvent, là, puis là, il y avait, oui,
C'est
oui, oui.
ça. Fait que je sais quand moi je les choisissais, il y en a beaucoup, puis il y en a beaucoup trop, on peut pas toutes les choisir, mais j'essayais de choisir des mots soit qui parfois reviennent souvent dans le livre, des mots qui peuvent, que je sais que les élèves vont pouvoir se servir dans d'autres lectures ou dans leurs écrits, ou des mots qui sont reliés au thème qu'on est en train de voir.
Mais comme est-ce que tu faisais des activités, genre là aujourd'hui, toi tu portes une carte avec ce mot-là, ou si je t'entends dire le mot, je te donne
Oui, oui,
OK,
oui.
autour de ces mots-là, puis tu les choisissais selon ce
Mais
que tu me
ces
disais.
mots-là, au préalable, faut les enseigner explicitement. Donc,
Oui,
mais une fois qu'ils sont enseignés explicitement, oui, on va aller faire plein de jeux puis d'activités comme ça pour réinvestir, pour que les enfants l'entendent le plus souvent possible. Mais il faut quand même qu'on aille tu sais, segmenter le mot, qu'on ait vu comment on le prononce, comment on l'écrit, qu'est-ce qu'il veut dire, d'aller voir la morphologie du mot. Donc, ça dans ta partie enseignement explicite. Puis une fois que tu as fait ça, ben là, tu vas voir le mot dans ces mots-là dans le livre. Et ensuite, ben, tu vas essayer de réinvestir le plus que tu peux ça peut être avec le Hall Pass ou avec, comme tu dis, là, les mettre des colliers ou des jeux questionnaires ou leur donner, mettre une bille dans le pot chaque fois qu'un élève de la classe dit un des mots qu'on a appris. Donc, il y a toutes sortes de petites façons comme ça de les inciter. I don't know, Kim, if you wanted to add, like, how do you pick your words?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this in English. I'll be honest. It I think because we're teachers, we're always looking for like that list. What are the words they have to know by the end of this year? And such a list doesn't exist. However, in my school, what we've been trying to do is create a vocabulary list that is almost like a scope and sequence. What words do they have to know in kindergarten that they're going to hear a lot in grade 1? What words do they need to know in grade 1 that they must know in grade 2 to do the concept? So we've brought together grades because grade 1 teachers were frustrated because when they said, vas-y au tapis, the kids should know qu'est-ce que ça veut dire le tapis. So, and if they don't, there's frustration with the kindergarten teachers. So that is one way that we are constructing our list of vocabulary words, and we're also constructing lists of vocabulary words based on the subjects. And so we're looking at our social studies, science, and math primarily, because we don't have time to cover all subject areas. And what are the words that students need to know in mathematics? Because our grade 5 teacher in French immersion, Madame Frappier, she's saying, how do kids not know qu'est-ce que ça veut dire la multiplication? Like they've heard this word over and over, and they have heard the word, they have no idea what it means. No idea. The X sign, like c'est comme ça. Mais qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? They don't know. They just know when they hear multiplication, they just picture the operation, but they don't actually know that's groups of equal numbers, right? So that is one way to build vocabulary.
C'est à partir de tes text sets. Donc, si tu choisis tes livres, ton sujet, tu peux regarder ton text set, puis aller voir c'est quoi les mots qui reviennent dans tous les textes. Puis ces mots-là, ben, forcément, ou peut-être avant de choisir, comme si tu choisis ton thème, c'est quoi des mots qui sont nécessaires pour comprendre ce thème-là? Comme si on est dans le thème de l'eau, ben, je vais vouloir savoir qu'est-ce qui est précipitation, évaporation, des choses comme ça, tu comprends? Sorry, I think I cut you.
No, it's fine. But I was also going to make note that in The Art and Science of Teaching Primary Reading by Christopher Such, he has a list of tier 2 words here. Now, arguably, because he's from the UK, the tier 2 words may not be as familiar in Canada as they are in the UK. But when I look at these words, it gives me a better idea of what tier 2 words actually mean. And a lot of them are not visible, tangible objects. They are more action words or like encountered, emerged, eliminated, dynamic, economy, expansion. So I often think of tier 2 words as being words that are not necessarily content specific, but could be used across a variety of different content areas. And so it really is an extraordinary long list. It's an infinite list. And I think it would be easier for us as teachers if we just had a concrete list of words that kids need to know. But that is something that we have had to develop as a school, but also using the curriculum as a guideline. The students have certain topics, not themes, topics that they cover in science and social studies and in those content heavy areas. To understand content, they have to understand the vocabulary. And so that's where we've pulled a lot of that tier 2 vocabulary from the content areas.
Une autre mini question, puis merci beaucoup de répondre. Il y a tellement de ressources. Est-ce que vous pouvez me guider vers du modelage sur YouTube ou peu importe, d'un read aloud ou idéalement en français, quelqu'un que je peux voir lire avec ses élèves? Parce qu'il y a tellement de monde et tellement de ressources.
En français?
En français, je ne sais pas, peut-être okay. Alex.
Ça peut être en anglais. Alex, le psychologue.
Je sais qu'il y a un balado là, de Pascal Lefebvre sur la lecture interactive enrichie en français.
Mais sinon, en anglais, si c'est plus facile en anglais, je suis correcte là. Dites-moi en anglais.
Molly Ness. En anglais, Molly Ness.
OK. Molly Ness. Tu es en train de l'écrire? Molly Ness. Perfect. OK, merci beaucoup.
Okay. Madame, we are running out of time. I wonder if we should just cover chapter 1 because our wonderful special guests had so much to share with us. I wonder if we could maybe have the next one a little bit longer so that we can cover what we don't cover in this one. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yep.
So if we take a look at the next key highlight, it's knowledge building through the use of text sets. Text sets, what are they? They are intentionally grouped sets of texts and media resources. Oh, sorry, I put 2 S's in resource. Focused on a specific topic designed to help all learners build background knowledge and vocabulary through a volume of reading on science, social studies, and other high interest topics. So when you're looking at a text set, they do discuss quad text sets. I often have that hook or that anchor, and that anchor for my students is usually that oral language piece. It's visual, it has bright illustrations, something to hook them, to make them curious and want to learn more. That is what my anchor text aims to do. I really like this research. It says in a study on low-income pre-K and kindergarten students, Susan Newman and Kafer back in 2018 showed that reading a series of texts on various science topics helps students learn the concepts and the words in those texts and develop expressive language. The results were especially pronounced for English language learners. And I think that's so important. And again, it builds that oral language piece. And it really develops that sort of scaffolding in terms of they're going to hear the vocabulary words over and over and over again. And so that if we think about that sort of scope and sequence and repeated practice of those vocabulary words, the more they hear those words, the more likely those words are going to stick.
They also say no text is too simple. Et ils recommandent aussi de commencer avec un texte qui est simple. Parce que en commençant avec un texte qui est simple, encore une fois, on s'assure que tout le monde ait la même base. Puis quand ils disent no text is too simple, c'est que même nous comme adultes, quand on veut, on cherche quelque chose, on veut avoir une information, mais on veut toujours avoir le texte qui est le plus simple et le plus clair possible. Fait que si on commence avec un texte qui est simple, ça permet de faire comme une base, une fondation pour que tout le monde ait la même fondation, pour après ça, comme Kim disait, là, d'aller ajouter un niveau de difficulté. Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to mention one more thing before I talk about my husband. The other important piece that I think we sometimes neglect is the importance of building that content knowledge so they have something to write about. And I know when I was teaching grade 2, I always had them write about what they did at home. What did you do over Thanksgiving weekend? What did you do over your summer? What did you do over March break? Now I'm in a much lower SES school, And most of the kids didn't do anything over Thanksgiving. For some of them, it was actually really traumatic because they have an incarcerated parent. And so that's where they went for Thanksgiving, was to see that parent in jail or in the penitentiary. And so I no longer ask students to journal about their own experiences because, like Meredith said, that really highlights the inequities in the classroom and in the school, and in the small groups. Is content focused. It is about a topic we're studying in class. If we're talking about the changing of the seasons, we will talk about that, because then that way they can regurgitate what their understanding of what they've learned, rather than regurgitate what they already know they did. That's not learning anything. They know what they did on the weekend. They know what they didn't do on the weekend. Why should I ask them to highlight that in writing? Because for some of them that was traumatic. But if we ask them to write about something that we are all learning, that's going to create a more equitable playing field, but it's also going to help me understand how well did they learn what I taught.
Puis c'est une bonne occasion aussi pour eux d'aller écrire les mots de vocabulaire qu'ils ont écrits. Puis on dit, if they can write it, they can read it. Ça fait que s'ils sont capables de l'écrire, ça veut dire qu'ils pourront le lire. Puis quand on fait écrire les enfants sur ce qu'ils ont fait la fin de semaine, souvent, moi, je trouvais que ça faisait juste comme une liste. Ça faisait juste une liste de, j'ai fait ceci, ça, ça, ça. Ben, on permet pas d'aller utiliser les mots, justement, du niveau 2, les mots plus qualitatifs. Je vais te laisser aller parler de ton mari.
Everyone's probably heard this story already, so I will give you the abbreviated version. But the role of knowledge, which are actually three components of knowledge. If we took knowledge and we sort of separated it, we could talk about background knowledge. That's the knowledge that they come into the classroom having already experienced, like lived experience. We can talk about content knowledge, which is sort of the information, the facts, the meaty part of learning. And then we can talk about funds of knowledge, which is a little bit harder sometimes to understand, but it's important to understand when we are teaching students from different cultures, because different cultures carry with them different realities. And one of the examples is the role of mom and dad, or assuming that there's a mom and dad and not necessarily two moms or two dads. And so, we have from our background experience, have these funds of knowledge based on the culture in which we were raised. And so we have to sort of leave our assumptions at the side, at the door, and not assume all students in the classroom will be comfortable or understand that some families have two moms, or may not understand that mom works outside of the home and dad works in the home. And there was a book that I read to my students last year. I think it wasn't Corduroy. I can't remember the name of the book. And it was the dad who went to the laundromat. And that was new for some people. First of all, they didn't have any concept of why would they leave the house to go to the laundromat. Whereas for some of the students, that was very normal and very much their lived experience was to do their laundry outside of the home and to have to put coins in to pay for it, or tap now with a credit card. And so really thinking about the funds of knowledge, or those cultural norms that some kids might come to the text with. And so often when I'm thinking about the role of background knowledge, I think about my lack of knowledge when it comes to certain sports. And my husband is a golfer, and I knew nothing about golf. And so when he came home after we were first dating, came after a golf game, and he said he shot 72, his friend shot 100. I thought he lost. Not understanding that the lower score is actually the better score in golf, because in every other sport, the higher score is usually the winner. And so it is really important not to make assumptions of the knowledge that our students are coming into the text with.
Je vois ici, là, je pense que j'ai comme pas bien traduit le rôle des connaissances. Ce serait comme les connaissances plutôt de matière, de contenu, connaissances antérieures, mais les connaissances peut-être plutôt culturelles ou sociales. On parle dans le livre aussi de la fameuse étude du baseball pour démontrer l'importance des connaissances. Quand j'ai découvert cette étude-là l'année dernière, ça m'a vraiment parlé parce que ça démontrait que on a donné un texte au sujet du baseball à 4 groupes d'élèves du même âge. Un groupe où il y avait des très bonnes connaissances de baseball et c'était des très bons lecteurs. Un autre groupe qui avait peu de connaissances de baseball, mais de très bons lecteurs. Un autre groupe qui avait beaucoup de connaissances de baseball, mais de faibles lecteurs, faibles connaissances de baseball et de faibles lecteurs. On s'entend pour dire que les élèves qui avaient beaucoup de connaissances et qui étaient des bons lecteurs allaient le mieux réussir et que ceux qui avaient peu de connaissances sur le baseball et étaient des faibles lecteurs allaient le moins réussir. Mais ce qui est surprenant, c'est que les élèves qui avaient le plus de connaissances sur le baseball surpassaient les élèves, les bons lecteurs. Donc, ça démontre vraiment que lorsqu'on connaît le sujet, on a une longueur d'avance. Comme moi, si je lis un livre sur la danse, j'ai dansé toute ma vie, mais je sais c'est quoi un pas de bourrée, un chat, un saut de chat, des entrechassés, puis sur la scène, le côté court, jardin, alors que peut-être qu'il y a quelqu'un qui n'a jamais fait de la danse, c'est pas c'est quoi. Mais si tu me donnes un texte sur les finances avec des termes, ça va être du chinois, je ne comprendrai pas ce que je lis, même si je suis quand même une bonne lectrice. Donc, ça démontre vraiment l'importance des connaissances.
My dog is going crazy right now. Could you talk about this one?
On va passer vite parce qu'on en a déjà parlé tantôt, mais les 3 niveaux de vocabulaire. Donc, le niveau 1, c'est vraiment les mots de base que d'habitude, les enfants connaissent déjà en arrivant à l'école, mais pas si ce sont des nouveaux arrivants. Comme lorsque les élèves font de la francisation, ils vont apprendre les mots de niveau 1, Tier 1 qu'on appelle. Donc, c'est des mots simples qu'on utilise dans la vie de tous les jours. Ensuite, on a les mots de niveau 2 qui sont un petit peu plus spécifiques puis qui permettent de créer des nuances dans le texte, comme patiemment. Euh, J'essaie de penser à des mots patiemment, courageusement, ardemment. Alors, il y a un exemple dans le livre où est-ce qu'il y a un texte et on a enlevé tous les mots de niveau 2. Puis on voit que lorsqu'on enlève ces mots-là, il reste plus beaucoup de mots, puis que la compréhension devient difficile. Donc, c'est pour ça que ces mots-là sont vraiment importants à enseigner avant pour aider les élèves à comprendre le texte. Et puis, plus on avance dans les niveaux scolaires, plus les textes sont complexes, donc plus il va y avoir de mots de niveau 2. Puis, les mots de niveau 3 mais, sont vraiment spécifiques à les matières. Donc, par exemple, comme là, pour la photosynthèse, oh, you can go. Did your dog start?
He stopped barking, so I thought, oh, I was supposed to do that. Sorry. So niveau 3, tier 3 words are also known as like domain specific vocabulary, and they tend to belong to one topic or subject area. I often think my parents are pharmacists, and so they would often come home with very specific vocabulary like Biaxin and penicillin and amoxicillin and prescription and amongst other words that didn't really stick. But those were not words that I would ever well, I do have to use them now as a mother. I have to put my own children on antibiotics, but it really is domain specific vocabulary when you're in medicine or if you're in sciences or if you're in carpentry or if you're in plumbing. There are a lot of those words that aren't necessarily everyday words for everyday people. And one thing that I have learned as I've gone on my science of reading learning journey, not everybody knows what a grapheme and phoneme is. Not everybody understands what a morpheme is. And so when we're talking about domain specific vocabulary, my husband likes to make fun of me and he'll say, oh, how was your grapheme phoneme discussion tonight? Only because those are not words he was ever familiar with, but I didn't also understand the words bogey and eagle and handicap the words had different meanings to them too, but the vocabulary piece in the science of reading can greatly impact people's ability to understand what they're teaching and what is being taught to them, but also can be a barrier. And so I know when I first started my learning journey about the science of reading, I didn't want to learn anything about morphology because the word itself was intimidating. The word morphology, because I didn't understand it, I didn't even know where to start. Same with the word orthographic mapping. Sometimes I hear people misuse the word orthographic mapping. I'm like, no, that's spelling. You're literally doing spelling, but they're calling it orthographic mapping because they don't understand the vocabulary. So having a misunderstanding of the vocabulary can greatly impact one's initiative to learn more because it can be a barrier to prevent wanting to learn more, like the word morphology was for me. And it can also really further misunderstandings, like somebody who used the word, oh, I'm teaching orthographic mapping. Look at me teach orthographic mapping to my children, my students. I'm like, you're not teaching orthographic mapping, you're teaching spelling. So I think it's just really important to highlight and to teach vocabulary in context, but sometimes pull out those words in isolation to help prevent any misunderstandings.
Ça me fait penser à mon mari travaillait dans un magasin de nutrition, puis il y avait des clients qui sont rentrés, puis là, il posait des questions, puis il dit, ah, mais ceci, ça ferait vraiment des bonnes collations. Puis mon mari est anglophone, mais il s'est forcé de parler français aux personnes. Puis les personnes ne comprenaient pas. Puis il a dit, oui, ça ferait vraiment une bonne collation, tu sais, quand t'as faim l'après-midi, puis les personnes, ah, tu veux dire comme un snack? Oui, un snack. C'est juste pour dire que comme il n'y avait pas le vocabulaire de base, puis il se comprenait pas, tu sais, puis alors que lui, c'est un anglophone. Je sais depuis que je connais l'importance du vocabulaire, en tant que maman, j'essaie, puis je sais que toi aussi tu le fais beaucoup, Kim, avec tes filles, j'essaie de vraiment travailler leur vocabulaire, puis de profiter de toutes les occasions possibles pour leur apprendre des nouveaux mots. Comme en fait, cette semaine, on a été à la caserne de pompiers, mais je leur ai expliqué c'est quoi une caserne, puis là, toutes les parties du camion de pompier, le boyau d'arrosage, la borne de fontaine. Donc, n'importe quand on est dans l'auto, on essaie de travailler sur ces... Toutes les occasions sont bonnes finalement pour travailler le vocabulaire.
Okay, and so maybe I want to respect people's time. So maybe this will be our last one. How can we help develop students' vocabulary? In the book, Know Better, Do Better, they suggest clustering volume of reading on one topic for a long period of time builds knowledge of that topic while growing vocabulary much faster, skipping from topic to topic to topic and just reading random books. And it says way faster. I paraphrased and said much faster, but this is my nephew, Ryan, and he lives in Kelowna, British Columbia, and he is fascinated is an understatement. Obsessed would be a more realistic statement. He is so passionate about everything to do with cars. He knows everything there is to know about cars. And so because he has this interest in them, he knows the parts, he knows the different brands. We'll go through a parking lot, he'll say Mercedes, BMW, and name them all. And so he gravitates towards those books, which is just furthering his knowledge of them. And if we think about the Matthew effect, students who come to school with a rich vocabulary are going to already be at an advantage compared to students who come to school with minimal words in their vocabulary or in their word bank, mental lexicon. And so when we are speaking to them, they may not connect those words to familiar words. Whereas Ryan, for example, if you're doing a unit on cars per se, or what have you, he's going to have a lot to contribute and he's going to grow that knowledge because he already has a foundation. And so when we want to build students' content knowledge, what we want to do is we want to hook them. Just like that car, we want to hook them, and then we want to just feed as much information into them as possible on that one topic.
We're going to skip that.
Yes.
OK. Alors, ça sera tout pour ce soir. Merci beaucoup. Je sais qu'on a dépensé un petit peu beaucoup le temps, mais on était vraiment chanceux d'avoir David et Meredith avec nous qui ont pu répondre à nos questions. Ça fait qu'on a décidé d'ajouter une autre session vu que, il y avait beaucoup de choses dans ce livre-là. Donc, on a le 14 novembre, comme c'était prévu, qu'on va faire la partie 2 du livre. Puis, on a ajouté le 5 décembre, on va faire la partie 3. Donc, on espère que vous serez avec nous. Merci beaucoup d'avoir été là. On vous souhaite une belle soirée.
Merci
And
à
before we
vous.
go, I just want to highlight the Know Better, Do Better podcast with Meredith and David. It is excellent. And so if you have a chance, Know Better, Do Better, the book, and Know Better, Do Better, the podcast. Merci.
Merci. Bonne
Thank
soirée.
you. You want to stop recording?
Yes, I did.
I don't think you did. It's still recording on my side.
Stop share.
Hmm.
See?